Thank you very much, Paige. It's delightful to be here on a rainy, dreary Vancouver December day. I appreciate it because, frankly, there's a lot going on here in British Columbia. I think we've just heard something about what's happening in the library community. I think we could repeat that in the museum community and archaeology, in terms of preserving the built environment and historic sites, and in terms of archives and the preservation of archives. And it's real pleasure to see this kind of group come together, representing the different heritage disciplines in the province, looking at how to collaborate, how to move forward into this new world of digitization, and how to perhaps work nationally and internationally to ensure that British Columbia and information sources about British Columbia are available, and as well that your citizens have access to the riches of the world that are quickly going online. It really is delightful, and I hope along the way my remarks might encourage you, might give you a few topics to talk about, and give you some few ideas about what's going on nationally that we all are trying to develop, and some vision of where this might go. At the same time, I have to advise you that the organizers of this conference took a real risk in inviting someone whose career has been largely as an archivist to give the keynote address. There are, you know, stereotypes, and my archival colleagues who are here know that in the course of our careers we have found there are certain stereotypes. When I was a young archivist at Queen's University, I was introduced as being the university archivist, and the immediate response was, you're not old enough to be an archivist. I wish I could hear that again. When I was provincial archivist in Saskatchewan, I was down one evening south of Regina in one of the rural municipalities to talk about local history and genealogy and archives and all good things. And over the usual chicken dinner that's traditional in Saskatchewan town halls and basements and community halls, I was sitting beside a municipal councillor and tried to talk to him. He wouldn't talk to me. Couldn't get any reaction out of him at all. And he was the one who stood up and introduced me, and he introduced the provincial anarchist. And I had to advise them that even under Al Blakeney's NDP government in Saskatchewan, there wasn't a provincial anarchist known to be on the staff of the provincial government. But there are advantages, and again, my archival colleagues know this, there are advantages to being an archivist, because you see, I'm also married to an archivist. We're not that enterprising, I guess. We don't look that far for mates. But I'm married to an archivist. And someone at our wedding some years ago now said, marriage between two archivists? It's going to be an ideal marriage. As they both grow older, they'll both become more interested in each other. So when I tell Ruth she's not growing older, she's growing better, she wants to know, am I speaking personally or speaking professionally? Anyway, you have just heard, I think, the entire body of humor known to the Canadian archival profession. Now that I am formally and legally a librarian as well, I know there are other humor and stereotype associated there. I'm sure the museologists and the archaeologists and all of the others who are represented here, certainly the genealogists know it. There are other stereotypes in the heritage disciplines. And maybe that's one common thing you could do, is share some of that humor. Because I need some more jokes. Either that or I need to go internationally and find other audiences, because I'm running out of Canadian audiences. But one thing I know is happening is that the web participation and a very active role that we've been taking in developing the web is certainly changing the image of archivists and reasserting the fundamental importance of librarians, museologists, and the other heritage curators in our triple role as stewards of society's information assets, as experts in maintaining integrity and context of evidence, whether that evidence is official record of the government, court records, or whether it's the artifacts from an archaeological site, where context provides the meaning and provides the significance, And thirdly, in our role as experts in managing, retrieving, providing access to massive, multi-formatted, multimedia collections, and in assisting the public in understanding them, whether it's through museum exhibits, online materials, whether it's in the reference room in the public library down the street. It's all of those. Those are our roles as stewards, as those who can protect and preserve the context as evidence, and thirdly, as experts in managing and retrieving. That all of these become increasingly significant as we move further into the web world. As I think all of you realized, I've chosen the topic that I've chosen for my talk this evening, From Canada, by Land, deliberately evokes that famous inscription marked on a rock on the British Columbia coast by Sir Alexander Mackenzie on July 22nd, 1793, and the conclusion of his expedition as the first European to cross the North American continent, and he marked his place. It's a deliberate choice because librarians, archivists, museologists, historic site curators, etc., are, like Mackenzie and his generation, exploring a new land. This is the virtual world. We're still exploring its landscape and features, measuring its potential, assessing its hazards. The boundaries are vague, and I keep hearing that joke about someone who came to a web page saying, "Congratulations, you have reached the end of the web. Beyond here, there be dragons." We're still measuring this land. We're still understanding this land. The new knowledge frontier is a different place, both for us as information providers and for our varied clientele. It is a world which presents superb new possibilities for broad public access to our rare and unique resources, and our material and the web are made for each other. The web looks for content, we have content. We can take those rare, valuable, irreplaceable artifacts, books, documents, photographs, films, broadcast material, architectural drawings, and we can make them accessible there on the web for everyone to use in the public library, in the school, in their own home. At the same time, this new land is demanding, it's testing our professions and our disciplines and our response. We're learning it's a competitive world. Google and Microsoft are out there seeking to gather information resources and knowledge resources, pull them together. They're not entirely sure what for. They just know those are valuable in the very long term. We know this world is evolving rapidly. Frankly, it's still in its infancy. Decade, 15 years ago, we hadn't heard much about it. It wasn't particularly visible. What's it going to be like 10, 15, 20 years from now? We're finding that our various heritage disciplines as librarians, as archivists, as curators, common interests in preserving electronic materials, whether published or unpublished, whether broadcast. We're all sharing those problems and those issues. We're also learning about the possibilities for extraordinary new access. We're learning about the problems of retrieval. When you add and add millions of images into the web, all Canadian content, all British Columbia content, and when you get up into the petabytes of information, the existing search engines break down. And we need to find new ways of classifying, of assisting, and structuring public access to that material. It demands, and this new world demands, a renewed understanding of basic principles and values of our professions, because those must be defended, those must be protected. They have been tried and tested over a century or two. We must ensure that as stewards of this material, of publicly owned information resources, that we protect those principles. At the same time, how do we adapt? How do we work with new partners? What is the partnership with the private sector to look like? And how do we ensure our principles are respected in that process? It also permits, this new world permits and perhaps requires collaboration across institutions. I see this new world, and again, given my prairie background, I see it as it's a cooperative place. Those who are going to thrive, those who are going to survive in the new electronic world are going to be in a cooperative mode. They're going to work with new partners, search out other partners, look at how one puts things together in different ways. And I'm delighted to see, and I can already name, a fair number of cooperative projects underway here in British Columbia. We've been working with Simon Fraser University, the University of British Columbia. We've been working as well with the Geological Survey, taking the photographs we have of 100 years ago of the Rocky Mountains and putting them up online at the same time, taking modern photographs of the same sites and looking at the ecological and environmental changes that are apparent in that. The digital landscape is fascinating. It's changing in front of our eyes. A major library cooperative in the United States did a report in 2007 saying that the internet is part of daily life for a major part of our population. 89% of those surveyed for 4 years or more are using the internet. It's not just youngsters who are using it. 2/3 of the general public surveyed who are over the age of 50 have been going online for 7 years or more. We're at a saturation point with our use of new technologies. The use of search engines has increased from 71% to over 90%. Perhaps the most striking difference in today's digital landscape is the fact that the Internet's readers are rapidly also becoming its authors. And the emergence of a new classification of social websites is changing the construction and culture of the web. According to this library consortium, we have moved from an internet built by a few thousand authors to one constructed by millions. Wikipedias are one prime example of what happens when you have collaborative working space. As an interesting corollary to all of this, the use of public libraries is growing. Circulation is on the rise, and web users report that the time they spend reading, whether print or digital, has increased over the last 12 months. The web is not displacing libraries, archives, museums, or anything else. The web is simply introducing people to the resources that are available to them. Digitization that we're talking about here for the next day or so is only part of the Web 2.0 story. The interactive web of Google, of blogging, of social marketing, of crowdsourcing, of automated discovery, of Flickr, of YouTube, of Facebook, of Twitter, of Web 2.0, of Web 3.0, podcasting. Phenomenal what's going on out there. And soon, frankly, all of this is going to be fully mobile. At a conference last Monday in Stratford, Ontario, the new Stratford Institute coming together, it was very clear, don't buy another desktop and do not buy another laptop. Just get the latest iPhone or what is it, the BlackBerry, what's the next one coming? Storm. Everything will be available there. You won't need your computer. It will all be fully mobile and fully accessible wherever you are. All of us, I think, can add to that story. I've just touched on what's happening out there, the trends, the description of current reality and what's happening. All of you have your own stories. All of you and your families and your your colleagues are using this web in different ways. And I think in this symposium, I hope we move beyond the exploratory phase of learning about the landscape and talking about pilot projects, and we've had a fair number of pilot projects. We have to now start talking about settlement. How are we going to settle this new world? How are we and our professions and our institutions going to settle this new world? How do we organize ourselves? How do we structure our approaches to create a sustainable Canadian presence in this new land? A presence that reflects and enlarges on Canadian values of diversity, of inclusion, of bilingualism, of multilingualism and multiculturalism, open, accessible, fair, reflecting our full population, accessible to our full population. That's our challenge right now, is how do we settle this new land? How do we make it ours? And how do we ensure that in this new world there is a sustainable Canadian presence? In the process, we need to remain true to the principles underlining our professions and bring forward our values. And for me, as librarian and archivist, and archivists do quote periodically my eminent predecessor, Sir Arthur Doughty, who was Dominion Archivist 1904 to 35. He wrote, Of all national assets, archives are the most precious. They are the gift of one generation to another, and the extent of our care of them marks the extent of our civilization. Published in 1924, he wrote it in July 1916. That horrible month of the Battle of the Somme, 60,000 casualties in the Empire forces on the 1st of July. The whole of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment was pretty well wiped out that day. He wrote that saying that this marks the extent of our civilization, the proper protection. The British Empire was at war, you'll recall, in World War I for what the Kaiser said was a scrap of paper. The treaty protecting the neutrality of Belgium from 1832, a scrap of paper, an archival document. That's the power of the record. Precious, and I find myself in talking to my dear friends and colleagues in the Treasury Board of Canada, asking them what's the most valuable asset the Government of Canada owns. They say, well, we've got the embassy in Tokyo is very valuable. Our national parks are valuable. And I say, yeah, that's interesting, but that's land. You don't steal land unless you have the documents. I've got the documents. What is the most valuable? The accountants say our entire collection as the Library and Archives of Canada, 180 years of active collecting, the total value of it is $1,000. I personally have offered $2,000 to buy the collection, take it off the government's hands. But quite joking aside, what is the most valuable asset? Archives. Documents sovereignty. Documents borders and boundaries. It documents someday we're going to be in world court to prove sovereignty of the Canadian Arctic. How are we going to do it? We need to prove who was there when they were there. That's the record. And it's the gift of one generation to another. And I find I have to remind sometimes my archival colleagues that Doughty wasn't saying that it's the gift of one generation of archivists to another. It's the gift of one generation Canadian society to another. This is our accumulated experience. This is our reflection on who we are and where we've been, and documenting in many forms the Canadian experience. That's the fundamental value that we have to keep in mind. For the libraries, the place of libraries was immortalized by the perceptive humor of the Canadian writer and economist Stephen Leacock, also in the 1920s. Both of these examples almost 100 years old. Leacock wrote, if I were founding a university, I would first found a smoking room. Then when I had a little more money in hand, I would found a dormitory. Then after that, or more probably with it, a decent reading room and a library. After that, if I still had more money that I couldn't use, I would hire a professor and get some textbooks. My apologies to the faculty who are here this evening. But it does indicate, and I think provides a timeless statement about the fundamental importance of the knowledge center, the library, whether it's in a university or whether it's now in society in every community across this country. The centrality of a library to a knowledge society remains absolutely fundamental. And I think British Columbia has appreciated that, and the policies that you put in place to support, develop libraries, literacy, reading, and get children involved in reading, absolutely key to the basis of a knowledge society. And you see it every day over at the Vancouver Public Library, that incredible place, which is a place for the community to come together, to talk, to plan, to work together. These values for librarians and archivists, and I'm sure we could find, and I didn't have time to go and look for museums and archaeologists, I think you're going to find their values in this that you can share. That the values articulated in the 1920s and defended by generations of librarians and archivists remain valid today, and they're absolutely fundamental to the future of the virtual world. And we need, in the heritage disciplines, to be confident enough of ourselves and our methodologies and our contributions to society to be able to work in the broader context, because frankly, the more I explore it, the more I find we have more allies than we realize in government, in the private sector, in the broader educational sector. There are many who recognize the fundamental value that we are bringing to the table in developing the virtual world, and particularly the Canadian presence. A year ago, we invited Tom Jenkins, a very successful Canadian businessman from Waterloo, He runs OpenText, Canada's largest software firm, which is, by the way, known a lot better in the United States and France, Italy, and Germany than it is in Canada, but one of the great success stories. I invited him to speak to our staff about what he is doing, and his specialty in OpenText is managing the enterprise content, taking corporations like Boeing, Ford, Pfizer, and 1,000 others, and how to manage the huge volumes of electronic content. And he stood in front of our staff and he said the 21st century belongs to librarians. Now our staff were somewhat taken aback, a little worried about the pressures on them to look after the 21st century, but he basically said, in dealing with the masses of electronic information, and frankly we are only at the beginning, and certainly in any corporation or in any government, you need the skills of a librarian as to how to classify, sort, organize, present, retrieve that mass of information. And he said, when you get beyond a petabyte, you're into serious problems with the current search engines. And you really need assistance if you're going to have something more meaningful than saying you have 20,000 or 1 million hits on that search you just made. You need something more meaningful and more useful. And to Tom Jenkins and to others, and you talk to RIM, talk to Jim Balsillie and others over there, and to the University of Waterloo, it's very clear that this is the huge challenge of the future, is how to manage, how to maintain, how to bring forward that kind of information, making sure it has value as evidence, that it has context and meaning, and how to bring it forward. And he was also very clear that the next phase in terms of technology development is not developing the tools, it's not the hardware and the software. The next challenge is the content and how to manage it. That is the big knowledge management challenge of the 21st century, is going to be managing content. And frankly, all of our heritage disciplines have had experience in doing that and have something really to contribute to it. There are partnerships available to us, and I'll be talking about where we're going with those in a minute. But governments at all levels, private sector, the educational sectors, need to work out with us how to develop the collaboration and a coalition that will bring together Canadian content in entirely new ways and give Canadians a distinct knowledge advantage in the 21st century. The Canadian government outlined its vision for knowledge advantage in the 2007 Science and Technology Strategy. Quote, Canadians must be positioned at the leading edge of the important developments that generate health, environmental, societal, and economic benefits in order to create a knowledge advantage. It is clear that Canada needs an information and communications technology strategy. We've invested in the high-speed research network, Canary, one of our great success stories. The provinces have been developing key projects such as the Electronic Library Network here in British Columbia, the Lois Hole Digital Library in Alberta, Knowledge Ontario, many others, and you'll be hearing about these tomorrow. But we need to build on these initiatives, to link them together, to build into a solid national base. An ICT strategy for Canada is not about wires and servers. We don't need those. We have them. We have the pipeline. We need to fill the pipeline with Canadian content and to ensure that the information that we hold in our respective libraries, archives, museums, and other institutions is brought into play as part of the knowledge base on which Canada will face the rest of the 21st century. The key to an ICT strategy and to successful digitization is an ambitious commitment to making our content accessible, searchable, and usable for the great variety of possibilities which Web 2.0 permits, expects, and most likely requires. We've begun the work. We started. The formation of the Library and Archives of Canada, which I represent, was not simply a random act of administration. It was a strategic response to the needs of Canadian society in the 21st century. Legislation is seldom quotable, but let me read a sentence from the preamble to our Act in 2004. Whereas it is necessary that Canada be served by an institution that is a source of enduring knowledge, accessible to all, contributing to the cultural, social, and economic advancement of Canada as a free and democratic society. Free and democratic society, a source of enduring knowledge, accessible to all, contributing to the social, cultural, and economic advancement of Canada. It's a statement written in our legislation. I think it applies to the library system right across the country, the academic libraries, the public libraries. It applies to the museums. It applies to the archives and the Canadian Council on Archives. A source of enduring knowledge. It's a powerful vision for knowledge in the 21st century. This was an unusual initiative. And I'm sure those of you who've worked in government will realize that it's very seldom, if ever, you see two departments who themselves say, it's time we came together. That we eliminate one of the head positions and that we integrate the two institutions. This doesn't happen in the public service. The public service is set up to deal with turf wars. And frankly, our central agencies had no idea what to do with this. They'd never seen two departments coming together and say, we want legislation, we want to put the two together, and we don't care personally what happens to either of us, the National Librarian Roch Cartier and myself. We simply think it's time. Because Parliament has challenged, and in the legislation has challenged our information professionals to come together to explore what it is to be a nationally relevant knowledge institution in this day and age, and to create a new type of knowledge institution, one that systematically selects, gathers, and preserves our documentary heritage, acts as a catalyst in the community, and makes information accessible to all Canadians. And the key to all of it is partnerships, catalysts. We can't do it all ourselves. We never will. And as you well know from Ottawa, it's usually very difficult to make things happen. I prefer to have a role to bring people together, to bring different groups, to bring different organizations, to bring the private sector and the public sector together and to try out new ideas. Because this is fundamentally what Canadians need. What we talked about is, Roch Cartier and I went across Canada, he was National Librarian, I was Archivist. What we heard from Canadians is that they want access to information. They want access to authoritative source material that documents our experience in this land. And you know what? We found Canadians are not the least bit interested in the arguments amongst archives, librarians, museums. They don't get it. They don't care. The ministers I deal with don't care. They just say, provide access in appropriate ways and respect the preservation of the material. Because the more information, the more authoritative content, rather than just the loose chatter that fills up too many blogs, but the more authoritative source material we make intelligently available, the more we promote growth and research, creativity and innovation, culture and artistic heritage, jobs and productivity, environment and economic sustainability, and a safer, greener planet. That's what this is all about. And certainly for library and archives, we're also a museum, by the way. I didn't mention we do have the National Portrait Collection. We have portraits of at least 1 million Canadians in our holdings from coast to coast to coast. And it's one of our other outreach and exhibition programs. But we are a museum, we are a library, we are an archives, and we want to work with others in Canada who share these aims and these directions. Because we're looking how we, in putting content up online, how do we develop a made in Canada solution rather than simply signing up with Google, as many of our American and British colleagues have done. The major research libraries in Canada basically said, we don't want to go with Google. Because fundamentally, Google's business plan is about free public access supported by advertising. That's their current business plan. Next year, advertising dollars could dry up. So you change the business plan to pay for access, pay per view. And once they've digitized umpteen million volumes in many libraries across the United States, it'll be cheaper to pay for access through Google, whatever they want to charge, rather than going out and digitizing the material again. We've decided, and I think the research libraries have decided, that we can do better. We can find one that reflects Canadian values and Canadians' willingness to make accessible, freely, publicly owned information resources. Our role has been a catalyst. We sponsored and supported a number of workshops across the country, bringing people from different backgrounds together, representing different parts of the heritage disciplines. We talked about standards for digitization and are rapidly bringing together standards for both digitization and putting material online. We looked at the needs and how we develop content. We looked at issues around the rights of authors and creators. And we brought it all together in a national summit looking at Canada's digital information strategy. That strategy identifies 3 critical challenges. 1, strengthening content. 2, ensuring preservation. And you very seldom hear Google talking about preservation. They'll keep it as long as it's in their business interests. And 3, maximizing access and use. The Canada's digital information strategy is up on our website. It's gone through various iterations. Please go and have a look at it. I can't go into great detail. But strengthening, let me take the 3 pieces: strengthening content, preservation, use. Content. We've done polling. We've worked with the Canadian government in our national polling. It's clear that 97% of Canadians support the preservation of library and archives material. I'm worried about the other 3%, but 97% support the preservation. 94% expect to have access to that material online. 94%. Between 25 and 30% say they're satisfied with the quantity and quality of Canadian information online. 94% expect, about 30% are satisfied. We have a gap. We have a huge service gap. That's the Web 2.0 gap that we have to work to fill. We're trying to bring together, and work is well advanced, on a unique public-private university partnership. It's led by a group called Canadianaorg, which is a refurbished organization set up in the 1970s, Canadian Institute for Historical Micro-Reproduction, where they microfished a lot of early Canadian publications. It's been revamped. We've added the private sector to it. It's just getting reorganized right now, but moving from microfiche into digital, and hopefully providing the base to coordinate a major national initiative around mass digitization of Canadian material. Their aiming and their initial focus is on the published realm, and I think the simplest way of putting their ambition is to say they want to digitize and put online everything ever published in Canada. Period. Government publications, newspapers, masses of reports, municipal materials, university materials, digitize, put online everything ever published in Canada. It's a huge ambition. It's doable. It's equivalent of 4 or 5 million volumes, and Google at University of Michigan has digitized 9 million. Private sector is there. Open Text Corporation that I've mentioned, very elaborate advanced software, and they're donating their software for the Canadiana project. Just donate it outright. Librarians acted with surprise, saying, well, you're going to ruin a market for yourselves if you donate it to us. And Tom Jenkins, the president of Open Text, just laughed and said, libraries aren't a market for us. You can't afford our software. You never will afford our software. Boeing can afford our software. You can't. We'll just donate it because we think it's in Canada's best interest. And he's bringing together a coalition of other business leaders willing to help support and fund, including his good friend, president of RIM, to help support this. The principles on which it is based are clear. An open content collaboration where there's no transfer of ownership or rights. Everybody can do it. All institutions can take part. You don't transfer any ownership. You just put it up online and allow the search software to access it and use it. Maximize public access within a framework of respect for copyright. Absolutely, we're going to respect copyright. Google's solution is to hire more lawyers. Our approach will be, we will work out ways to respect copyright, except there's one area of copyright I have a lot of problem with. It's called crown copyright. Governments are hiding phenomenal amounts of material behind the concept, and frankly, they get no revenue for it. Yeah, Stats Canada gets some revenue out of copyright. Okay, if there's a revenue flow that you can prove, leave it. But all those consultants' reports that are sitting on shelves in government libraries, they're consultants in government today selling the same report that they sold 5 years ago, and the government's forgotten we have that report already, and the consultant will update it and toss it in again. What about all that material, all the crown copyright? What about the university-based material? Let's get it up online. We want the other principles to reflect Canada's values as bilingualism, multiculturalism, inclusiveness, equity, and we're going to do it to the best international standards and best practices, so we do it once, we do it well, and we make it available. A number of us are already working in this area, no longer just the small little projects and let's do a few pages of this and a curated exhibit online. That's valuable and it reflects the community. But I think our major institutions have to now engage in mass digitization. Take it all, beginning to end. And we're doing that. Early Canadian literature is going up online. City directories. We've taken all the papers of John A. Macdonald and they're all up online right now. Took the Canada Gazette, 1841 to 1990. One of the key documents of record for government, 10 million images. Those are up online. We're now starting the Hansard. The debates of the House of Commons and the Senate in both English and French, those are going up online. World War I service files, the attestation papers for the 630,000 Canadians who served in the First War, they're up online. Passenger lists, maps, the whole dictionary Canadian biography is up online in both languages, and we've also, of course, got the Canadian Genealogy Centre. Other institutions in Alberta and British Columbia are doing similar kinds of projects, but the point is now to move beyond the curated exhibit, which was good for the Web 1.0 world, into the Web 2.0 world, where frankly users want access to all the material and let them work out what to do with it. Part of this Canada project will be a sort of a participation campaign in digital. First, we've got to get all the governments on side and basically ask them, why don't you get all your material up online? Just do it. You know, the debates of the provincial legislature, all your statutes and laws and all your regulations, all the reports of departments going back in history, get them all up online. Why are we still defending Crown copyright? What's its value? What's its public has already paid for it, get up online. Similar universities. Similarly, non-governmental organizations, get there, be visible. Municipalities, we've been talking to their Information Systems Association, they're saying municipalities will cooperate if we preserve. They will digitize and put things up online if we, in terms of this project, can guarantee that we will preserve it. It's going to be fun. I think we're going to do it once, do it well, get Canada's knowledge base together. It's going to be tremendous for government. I talk to young people coming into the Canadian government, and they're saying, well, at university we had access to all these research bases and knowledge bases. Where are they in government? They don't exist in government. So where's public policy? What's public policy being based on? In the educational system, whether it's grade school, university, phenomenal resources can be made available and accessible. Internationally, you know, huge numbers of countries right now are having significant problems with drought. Well, Canada and the prairies has done a whole series of studies over many years on dryland farming. Why aren't those studies up there and accessible to those in other countries who need to access it? And how do we develop the software and push the software further? Certainly one thing OpenText is hoping for is this is going to produce such a massive database of interrelated information, it's going to push the technology and the software further in terms of search and retrieval. And by the way, our students are going to have to learn. And there are great opportunities for them to learn in this sphere, in the University of Waterloo. for one, and I think other universities will be looking at what kind of research projects can they build around this kind of approach. The second broad thing for the digital strategy is preservation, and a number of us are building trusted digital repositories to meet international standards. University of Alberta, Calgary, University of Toronto, Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales du Québec, and ourselves. This is going to take funding and support. This is not easy and it's not cheap, but if we're going to preserve our evidence of who we are and what we've done, we have to ensure the proper preservation, and we're going to be looking at partnerships to get that done. It's a work in progress. What I'm talking about here is a lot of backroom stuff has been going on over the last year or two. You're going to start hearing a lot more, and there's going to be leadership from Canadianaorg at the national level. In other areas, the new Stratford Institute, being developed by the University of Waterloo, will be providing leadership in this area and providing educational opportunities and building this for the future. Starting with print, because frankly with print materials, once you digitize, you can do the OCR and you can provide access in entirely new ways. With manuscript, with audiovisual, with museum artifacts, it's a different project. And I think that's phase 2 or phase 3 of this kind of process, but already some of the educational broadcasters are wanting to be part of this. We're doing and experimenting with a number of things, the virtual silver screen and the virtual gramophone, looking at how we put sound and motion picture up online. And I'd like to suggest that what I've outlined here is a strategy for the library community where it's simple. Digitize everything, put it all up online. We need similar strategies for both archives and for museums. How far do we want to go? How much would we digitize? What is our ambition? And what does the public need and expect from us? For archives, it's such a massive material. We're putting millions of images online right now each year, and if we do it for 10 years, we'll have maybe 2% of our collection online. It's massive, and it's not needed to maintain the whole thing online. So the strategy is tell people what we have, tell them how to access it, digitize our most popular material and get it up searchable online, do some exhibits to show the range and depth, and we've done a major exhibit on the battle at Vimy Ridge, combining film and photographs and the service files and the unit diaries and the maps and a lot of other material in ways you can't do in a book, but show the range and depth of what is available. Develop a service called Digital On Demand to make more material available. Museums, what would your national strategy look like? How big is it? How much should be done? I know the national collections at the Museum of Civilization and Science and Tech. What really is the ambition there? Is it tell everybody what we have, how to access it? Perhaps you'll have some time here in the next day or two to talk about approaches. Let me give you briefly some report from the frontier as to what's happening out there as we've gone heavily into digital services. First of all, Canadians are discovering for the very first time the range and depth of the resources that have been preserved and maintained in libraries and archives for them. Most Canadians never knew this existed, never knew that we had all the service files of Canadians in the 2 world wars, never knew we had the passenger lists and the census records. We put the 1911 census up online a couple of years ago, 17 downloads per second from that website. It's now leveled off at about 7 or 8 downloads per second from that website. We're getting 1.5 million users per month online. We have the National Music Collection. It was on our shelves in Ottawa. We get 50 users a month coming in to see the National Music Collection or hear parts of it. We're now getting 50,000 downloads per month online. We've moved libraries and archives from being perhaps the least accessible heritage resource into the most accessible heritage resource. It used to be come to our reading rooms, put on white gloves, and we would allow you to see John A. Macdonald's papers of the Canada Gazette or the Hansard. Now you can do it online, at home. Mackenzie King's diary is up there in its full glory if you can't sleep some evening. Go and read the whole of Mackenzie King's diary. It's a fascinating historical document. And we keep adding every week, we're adding additional resources online. The second thing we're seeing happening out there is that history is becoming first-person singular. Canadians are discovering that you can find the detail online that allows you to talk about your family, your community, your history. It's not just the generalities we learned in school. It is personalized, and it shows the role of your family, when they arrived and so on. It is there. Very first time discovering that this is being kept and that they can access it. Phenomenal growth in genealogy. And by the way, genealogists are the best allies for the heritage disciplines. If you have any issue and you can convert it into something that genealogists care about, they will submerge MLAs or MPs with emails, and they are sophisticated at doing it, and they've done it. The 1911 census is proof of it. The first and probably so far the only electronic email campaign that resulted in legislation. Despite what certain government departments wanted, they fought a great fight. Third thing happening, everybody can interpret the past. Everybody can see this material and they can then post their own interpretations. There's some strange interpretations of Canadian history going up online, but won't withstand the test of criticism, but everybody can look at it. History is changing. I think all of you realize that the most contested issue in Canadian history at the moment is where was the first hockey game? Well, there are two communities in Nova Scotia who've been in court fighting over this issue from the early 1840s. And there's a bit of evidence on each side. But someone went into one of our websites and typed in the word hockey and found an obscure letter written by Sir John Franklin on one of his Arctic expeditions in 1827, where he said in the letter his men were playing hockey yesterday. We released that letter and made it public. We heard from the lawyers in Nova Scotia who said, well, Franklin was leading a British naval expedition. They didn't have skates, so it was probably field hockey of some sort that they were playing. So we went into another website, the Champlain Society, that venerable group who publishes historical documents, had published the whole journal of Franklin on that expedition. Typed in the word skate. This is not a word you'll ever find in the index to any book. Typed in the word skate, found that the day before Franklin wrote his letter, he put in his diary, his men are skating on the ice. Skate, ice, hockey, sounds like 1827, up in the high Arctic, not in Nova Scotia. Fascinating what's going on. I did have to tell my friend at the time who was working with me, the National Librarian, Roch Cartier, technology wasn't there yet for us to say whether the men were wearing red hockey sweaters or blue hockey sweaters. But other thing that's happening is about affirmation of identity and diversity. And there's been a whole series of these projects. One we have, Project Naming, where we had thousands of photographs taken in the high Arctic in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and they're all identified as Captain Jones and 5 Eskimo. The local people had no identity. We digitized them, sent them up to the high school in Nunavut. The high school students, their teachers, and the elders began working together. And they began giving name to the people in those photographs, and they're superb photographs. Extraordinary. 75% success rate to this point. And that's getting recorded there and with us. Here with University of British Columbia, major databases about Chinese immigrants to Canada from both the West Coast and the East Coast, taking our resources and some other passenger lists that are here. Over 100,000 individuals are named, or just about 100,000 are named. We're working with the Human Rights Museum right now, the new one that's going to be unveiled next week in Winnipeg, and providing them with information about Japanese Canadians and Chinese head tax and other things. Things are happening out there. And the other thing I want to mention, and I see time is moving on, but let me take one of our national myths. And there's a national myth that Canadians are not interested in history, that our history is boring. We didn't have a revolution, we didn't have a civil war, thank God. This week our history's not very boring at all. But there is the Dominion Institute does a semi-annual survey and says Canadians are ignorant. that 8 in 10 or 82% of Canadians between ages 18 and 24 failed a basic history exam, and less than half of those surveyed could name Canada's first Prime Minister. And a whole range, and every 6 months we get another version of this. We do another Trivial Pursuit questionnaire, and we say Canadians are ignorant, we're getting worse and worse. Can't even name the date of Confederation. But the other side of the coin, Canada, People's History, the most watched television documentary in Canadian history. We produced a series this past year called Who Do You Think You Are? With CBC, looking at genealogy, 13 individuals. The night we did Don Cherry's genealogy, there were 110,000 searches on our website in a couple of hours. Canadians rank pride in their history higher than sports or scientific achievements. Higher. Is British Columbia willing to spend the same amount of money on history as they're spending on the Vancouver Olympics? Because Canadians rank pride in their history higher than sports or scientific achievements. Maybe we'll do better at the Olympics, I don't know. Parks Canada asked Canadians across the country about their attitudes towards Canada's history. 79% agreed it is important that the stories of Canada's history be passed on. I'm going to suggest that we've been looking at the wrong thing. Asking these basic questions, particularly of young people, is coming at it the wrong way. The young people I talk to don't do memory work. We used to do memory work and long series of poems and other bits and pieces that stay with you through life. But instead, if you ask young people who was Canada's first Prime Minister, they don't know. But within a second, they will have pulled out the portable communication device and say, identify John A. Macdonald, and here's the full DCB entry, and here's a list of all the books published about John A. Macdonald, here are the portraits of John A., here are the political cartoons, here are the newspapers from that period. They've got a wealth of material. They don't memorize. To the youth of today, memory is something external. It hangs on a ribbon around the neck. What they do have is search strategy. And don't underestimate them, and don't underestimate their interest. They are looking for, searching for those numbers. About 94% expect access to our holdings online. That's the youth, and that number is going to go up, and they are not just going to ask for it. They're going to demand it. They are taxpayers, they are citizens. They demand it, and they expect it to be there. And anyway, I got a lot more here, but I better wrap this thing up. Let me bring it together, because I've used the analogy that the web is a new world, and we are settling a new frontier. So let me close with a statement from former Prime Minister Sir Wilfrid Laurier. He made it just over 100 years ago in September 2005, when the provinces of Saskatchewan and Alberta joined Confederation. He went to Edmonton, spoke to the people there, largely immigrants, Central European immigrants to the province at that time. Here's what he said. He said, "I see everywhere hope, I see everywhere calm resolution, courage and enthusiasm to face all difficulties, to settle all problems. We do not anticipate and we do not want that any individual should forget the land of their origin or their ancestors. Let them look to the past. Let them also look to the future. Let them look to the land of their ancestors, but let them also look to the land of their children." That is where we are. In the heritage and the information disciplines that are represented here, that's where we are. The land of our ancestors, to remember the principles and values of Stephen Leacock and Arthur Doughty and 1,000 others who've gone before us, and what they've expressed and what our institutions embody. To remember those principles and values and make sure that they are respected and carried forward into this virtual world. But let's also look to the land of our children, where they are. They're in a different sphere. And it's no less valid than the one we went through and that we've known. And it's an exciting one, and it's a demanding one. And they are going to have access to an absolute extraordinary range of information. I want to be sure, and I think all of you want to be sure, that they have access to authoritative information about the human experience in what is now Canada. that is there. We've developed the pipelines, and a friend of mine said, yeah, we've got tremendous pipelines electronically, and Canada is becoming the best connected country in the world, the best connected to American content. We need to ensure collectively, together, through cooperation with the different levels of government, our different institutions, that we ensure that this new land has a sustainable Canadian presence, that it's preserved, it's fully accessible, and reflects our values as Canadians. Thank you very much. Have a great conference.